the day I got the keys to my late grandfather's 2,500-acre valley estate. A woman wearing a bright red blazer stepped directly in front of my truck at the entrance and declared, "You have no business being here." Behind her stretched lines of razor wire fencing, multiple no trespassing signs, and a full residential development of 340 homes standing on what was legally my property. The HOA speaker system buzzed to life like the alarm of some private empire. I stayed silent. I simply looked at her, then glanced down at the folder in my hands, and realized one clear truth right away. I was going to need a much stronger lawyer than anything she had ever faced. Let's dive into what unfolded next. Drop a comment below and tell me which part of the world you're watching from. I read every single one. The road leading into Clearwater Valley wound along a quiet 2-lane county highway, through patches of scrub oak and limestone ridges. I drove with the windows open, one hand steady on the steering wheel, the other resting on a thick manila folder, officially stamped by the Delvane County Land Records Office. Inside lay the deed for parcel CV-187, 2,514.7 acres, lawfully passed down through inheritance from the estate of Harold Eugene Brooks to me, Matthew Allen Brooks. My grandfather had purchased the entire valley back in the 1960s, when it was nothing but open grassland and ancient pine forests. I had only been there twice as a kid, but as a professional geodetic engineer, I studied land records the way most people lose themselves in books, carefully, suspiciously, always hunting for anything that didn't add up. The first thing that caught my eye was the sign. Half buried in the tall grass beside the road stood an old weathered oak board that read, "Clearwater Valley, private property of H.E. Brooks." Right next to it was a newer polished navy blue sign featuring a sleek stylized tree emblem. Clearwater Valley Residential Community, managed by HOA. They hadn't taken the old sign down. They had simply covered it with the new one. At the main gate, 2 security guards in uniform examined my certified copy of the deed and called someone deeper inside the community. 3 minutes later, a white SUV pulled up with smooth, rehearsed efficiency. That was my first encounter with Donna Strickland. She was 58, with sharp platinum hair and a burgundy blazer, wearing the kind of cold, practiced expression that came from years of wielding influence. She looked me up and down, introduced herself as the president of the Clearwater Valley HOA board, and said, "I suggest you turn around right now. That document you're holding doesn't carry the weight you believe it does around here." Then she handed me a thick bound booklet titled The Clearwater Valley Long-Term Management Agreement, dated 2013. According to Donna, it granted the CVOA complete control over operations, development, and infrastructure for the entire property across a 99-year period. "You inherited a piece of paper," she told me. "We own everything that paper actually represents." With that, she turned and walked off. I remained parked at the gate and began reading through the agreement. My grandfather's signature appeared on it, or at least it closely resembled his. Harold Brooks had signed his name the same distinctive way for decades, bold, blocky, and firm. But this version showed subtle differences, slight hesitations, a faint shake, and uneven pressure. Having reviewed countless documents and handwriting samples in my line of work, I could tell when something wasn't right. I didn't raise my voice or cause a scene at the gate. I simply told Donna I would need some time to go over everything carefully. She gave a single nod and replied, "Take as long as you like. We've handled situations like this before." That last comment stuck with me. We've handled situations like this before. I drove away and immediately noted down 3 key questions. Was this agreement properly registered with the state? Did my grandfather have full legal capacity at the time of signing? And was the lawyer who handled it still authorized to practice? 4 days later, while I was renting a small room above a hardware store in downtown Delvane, 3 express envelopes arrived within a 2-hour window. That timing was no accident. It was carefully orchestrated. The first envelope came from Harrove and Strickland LLP, warning me of civil action if I kept interfering with CVHOA's management rights. The second was from the HOA itself, claiming I had broken 7 community regulations during my brief 11-minute stop at the gate, including interfering with residential security and spreading unauthorized documents, which referred to my own deed copy. The third was even more troubling, a printed screenshot from the community's private social media page. Donna had posted an alert about a suspicious individual, falsely claiming ownership of the land, and encouraged residents to report any contact with him. Over 140 comments followed, calling me a con artist and a threat. I photographed every page, then checked the attorney's state bar number on the first letter. Suspended since 2021. R. Harov had been issuing legal threats without a valid license. I marked his name with an asterisk and continued. On the sixth day, I visited the county records office to request the original survey plat. The clerk recognized my last name instantly. She leaned in and whispered, "Mr. Brooks, I want to help you, but Donna Strickland and the county recorder have been close for 12 years. If I access anything on this parcel, she might hear about it before you even leave the building." That was all I needed to hear. The local county system was clearly compromised. That same night, my cousin Carol called. Someone had contacted her mother, claiming I was being investigated for forging inheritance documents. They warned that if the family continued backing me, they could all face reports to the State Fraud Division. After hanging up, I laid every document across the floor and sketched a diagram. Donna's name sat at the center. From it, I drew 4 connecting lines to the HOA, the law firm, the county office, and the residential community. This wasn't some overconfident homeowners association. It was a tightly sealed system: legal pressure, social pressure, institutional pressure, and financial pressure, all designed to wear down anyone who dared to push back. Under the diagram, I wrote a single line: "To break a system like this, you have to build a bigger one." I left Delvane and headed to Austin, where Donna Strickland's name carried no weight, and the legal system operated on a level she couldn't easily manipulate. I rented a desk in a co-working space, spread out all my documents, and reached out to a lawyer named Evelyn Shaw. She had 22 years of experience in Texas property law and a strong track record of dismantling abusive HOA practices. She gave me 40 minutes. I used every second. When I finished explaining, she said, "I need to see the version of that agreement that was filed with the Texas Secretary of State's Long-Term Property Agreement Registry." Under Texas law, any land use agreement lasting longer than 10 years must be officially registered with the state. If it wasn't filed, it doesn't legally bind an heir. I asked her what would happen if it had never been registered at all. She looked straight at me and stated, "Then, as far as the law is concerned, it doesn't exist." While her office sent the formal request to the state registry, I phoned Carol and asked her to check 2 old storage trunks our grandfather had stored for decades in the back of his workshop. 3 days later, the trunks arrived. Inside were the critical pieces that would hold the entire case together. First, a 1961 Bureau of Land Management survey map that outlined the valley's original boundaries exactly as my grandfather had purchased them. Second, a typed letter from Harold Brooks to the county land office, dated November 2012, 14 months before the supposed agreement, in which he firmly rejected any cooperative land management proposal from the HOA. His words were direct and unmistakable. He had no interest, and he did not want further contact. Third, medical records from April 2013 that documented early signs of cognitive decline 3 months before the agreement was supposedly signed. Then Evelyn's response from the registry arrived. No matching records existed. The so-called long-term management agreement had never been officially filed, which meant it held no legal power over me as the rightful heir. In simple terms, the entire basis for the Clearwater Valley HOA's claimed control over my land was completely invalid. Now we had 3 solid facts. The agreement was never registered, my grandfather's legal capacity at the time was questionable, and the attorney issuing threats was operating with a suspended license. I asked Evelyn what else we required. She answered without hesitation, "We need Donna to confirm on record, in front of witnesses, that the document is genuine. That's when it becomes a trap." The next alert came from inside the community itself. A resident named Rick Danver sent me an anonymous email. He had grown tired of the HOA's control over the years. His message was brief. "Donna knows you brought in outside counsel. They held an emergency board meeting last night. She intends to end this permanently." Not long afterward, my landlady in Delvane called me in tears. A woman had warned her that continuing to rent to me could result in her being named in a real estate fraud investigation. Donna hadn't targeted me directly this time. She had gone after someone more vulnerable. Then Carol called again. A hand-delivered envelope had been left on her mother's porch. Inside was a color satellite image of the house with a handwritten note. "Tell your nephew to back off before this turns into something none of us can undo." That was the turning point for me. Until then, I had simply wanted my land returned. Now I wanted criminal charges, document fraud, witness intimidation, misappropriation of funds. Evelyn cautioned me that expanding the case this way meant there would be no going back. I told her to contact the FBI. Around the same time, Rick Danver decided to step forward. He agreed to cooperate and provided 2 important documents he had saved for years. The first was a set of handwritten board minutes from 2013. Next to Harold's name was a note. Harold signed. He didn't fully understand the content. That's fine. The second was an internal email thread showing Donna instructing the HOA to disguise payments to Harrove and Strickland LLP as special administrative fees rather than legal costs. Over 6 years, they had moved $287,400 from resident dues without any disclosure. At this stage, the strategy became razor sharp. Evelyn constructed it like a carefully planned demolition. 3 pressure points were triggered simultaneously. First, the bank. Pinnacle Federal held mortgages on 218 homes inside Clearwater Valley. Evelyn presented them with the registry findings and posed a direct question. If the CVHOA's management authority was never legally valid, then who actually held enforceable control over the land backing all those loans? The bank requested a private meeting within 48 hours. The risk was enormous. Second, the insurer. The HOA's coverage had been issued under the assumption that CVHOA was the legitimate land manager. Once that foundation crumbled, the insurer immediately suspended all policies pending a full review. Third, federal involvement. Special Agent Patricia Mercer of the FBI agreed to attend the next community meeting undercover. The pressure produced results almost instantly. Donna called an emergency community-wide meeting for the following Wednesday. The Clearwater Valley Community Center could hold 400 people. By 6:45 that evening, it was almost packed. I arrived early, took a seat in the middle section, and kept a brown accordion folder on my lap. Rick sat 4 rows behind me. Agent Mercer stood quietly near the back. A local reporter was positioned by the side exit with a recorder ready. Donna approached the podium at exactly 7:09 p.m., dressed in charcoal gray, with pearls and complete self-assurance. She described the bank and insurance issues as external misinformation meant to undermine a thriving community. Then, exactly as arranged, a resident in the 5th row stood and asked whether the long-term management agreement had actually been properly filed with the state since his mortgage servicer was inquiring. Donna replied without missing a beat. Of course it was. That agreement was executed in full compliance with every applicable requirement. I personally oversaw the process in my capacity as a licensed attorney, and every procedural step was completed properly. That was the moment everything detonated. Because every part of that statement was false. The agreement had never been registered. She no longer held a valid law license, and the procedures had not been lawfully followed. I didn't speak a word. I simply opened my folder to the Secretary of State response and tilted it so she could see it clearly from the podium. From 15 feet away, Donna read the words "No record found." For the first time since I had met her, her confident mask slipped, just for a second. But it was enough. The reporter caught it. The FBI agent saw it. And the recorder captured every syllable. The court hearing took place the following Monday. By then, the story had spread well beyond Delvane. Residents packed the gallery. Bank representatives attended. Reporters were present. Rick was there, too. Donna arrived with a new attorney, Leonard Bass, who appeared to have taken the case before fully grasping its depth. Evelyn's opening move was straightforward and crushing. She placed the HOA's management agreement next to the certified registry response from the Secretary of State. No matching record found for parcel CV-187. She then cited Texas property law. An unregistered long-term land agreement does not bind a lawful successor. Bass objected. Overruled. Next, a forensic document examiner compared my grandfather's signature on the agreement against a dozen verified samples from earlier years. The genuine signatures were steady, confident, and consistent. The one on the agreement showed breaks in pressure, compressed strokes, and drift typical of cognitive decline. The medical records from April 2013 followed, confirming early cognitive impairment. Bass objected again. Overruled again. Then Evelyn played the audio recording from the community meeting. Donna's own voice echoed in the courtroom. Every applicable requirement satisfied. I personally oversaw the process in my capacity as a licensed attorney. When it ended, Evelyn presented the Texas State Bar records showing that Donna, Strickland's law license, had been revoked years earlier. This time Bass offered no objection. Rick Danver testified next. He presented the internal HOA emails and the hidden legal payments, $287,400 diverted from resident dues without disclosure or proper approval. By the time he stepped down, the entire gallery understood what Clearwater Valley had truly been. Not a legitimate community organization, but a private scheme. Judge Castellano then looked toward the defense table and asked if they had any rebuttal evidence. Bass remained silent. Not for 1 second, for 3. In a courtroom, 3 seconds can feel like total collapse. The civil ruling came 4 days later. The court declared the 2013 management agreement null and void in its entirety. The Clearwater Valley HOA had no legal right to manage, occupy, collect fees on, or control my land. The court also ordered financial restitution. All management fees collected during the HOA's unauthorized operation, $4.1 million, were to be returned. The law firm's operations were shut down, and Donna's personal assets were frozen pending criminal action. The criminal proceedings followed swiftly. Donna faced charges for forgery of a fraudulent land instrument, witness tampering for the threats against my landlady and Carol's family, and mail fraud connected to legal documents sent under suspended credentials. Herove faced separate charges for practicing law without authorization. The structure that had been built over more than a decade began to crumble piece by piece. On the morning enforcement began, I drove out before dawn and parked on the county road shoulder near the old oak sign. Sheriff's vehicles arrived at 7:45 a.m. The gate was opened with a deputy's key. The private guard stepped aside. HOA offices were sealed. Records were packed up. Accounts stayed frozen under court supervision. And shortly afterward, Donna Strickland left the courthouse in handcuffs. No board members beside her. No legal letterhead to shield her. No waiting SUV. Just the full weight of a system that could no longer protect itself with lies. But the most difficult part came after the victory. The law was straightforward, yet the ethics were far more complex. 340 families had purchased homes there in good faith. They had raised children, paid mortgages, and built lives there. They were not Donna Strickland. They were the people she had exploited. I had no desire to make them innocent victims of the fallout. So 2 weeks after the enforcement order, I stood at the same podium in the same community center and told them the truth. I was not there to displace them. I was there to offer a legitimate path forward. With Evelyn's assistance, we created the Clearwater Valley Land Use Agreement of 2024. It granted every existing household a 50-year residential ground lease at a fixed annual rate that could increase by no more than 2% per year, on average about 40% lower than the previous HOA dues. The $4.1 million restitution fund would be distributed to residents according to years of occupancy and documented payments. An elected resident council, not an appointed board, would manage shared infrastructure with audited financial reports published every year. And every page of the new agreement would be properly filed with the state. No hidden documents, no double versions, no secrecy. Rick Danver was elected the first council chair. The morning after the new agreement was signed and filed, I drove into the valley along the old Eastern Access Road that my grandfather had built by hand in the 1960s. I stopped where the original oak sign still stood leaning near the fence line. I lifted it, brushed the dirt from the carved letters, and placed it back upright in its original post hole. Clearwater Valley, private property of H. Brooks. I didn't put up anything newer. It didn't need replacing. That afternoon, I sat on the steps of the modest house my grandfather had built in 1963 and received a message from Evelyn. Court has confirmed full CVLUA 2024. You are officially on record as the landowner. I read it once, set the phone aside, and listened to the wind moving through the pines. And that, in the end, is the real lesson. This was never simply a property dispute. It was a clear example of how illegitimate power maintains itself. Donna Strickland didn't just seize land. She constructed an entire maze around it. Documents, social pressure, institutional connections, legal intimidation, and internal rules that looped back on themselves until fighting her felt more tiring than giving in. That is how unjust power operates. It makes discovering the truth seem more costly than walking away from it. The solution wasn't more force. It was better questions. Is the agreement registered? Was the signer competent? Is the lawyer licensed? 3 simple questions. Public records, honest answers, and the whole structure fell apart. The second lesson is that documents rarely deceive if you know how to examine them. Almost every piece of evidence that brought down Donna Strickland's operation had been available in plain view all along. State registry records, bar status records, family archives, meeting minutes, medical files, recorded statements. No surprise witness, no shocking confession, no last-minute twist. Just patience, careful organization, and the determination not to be intimidated by paperwork. And the final lesson is about what ownership truly means. My grandfather left me 2,500 acres of Texas land. He also unintentionally left 340 families living on it in good faith. Real ownership isn't the freedom to do whatever you want. It's the responsibility to handle honestly everything your ownership affects. Donna believed control and ownership were identical. She spent 11 years proving they were not. Because in the end, ownership didn't look like a blazer, a sealed document, or a gate built on stolen authority. It looked like restoring what was right, protecting the innocent, and standing firmly on land that had always been held with integrity. That is what genuine power looks like.